Hi, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, and today I'm going to teach you how to build your first pro-level bass pedal board. Today I'm building a rig for one of my good friends, Robert Williams. Robert has been working as a sales engineer at Sweetwater for many years, and he is a real tone hound when it comes to the great bass gear, and certainly has access to all the best stuff that's out there, being somebody that works at Sweetwater. Robert's curated a really cool pedal board that uses a combination of some boutique items as well as some more common stuff that you might be able to find at any guitar store across the country, and he's combined them for a really nice compact bass rig. But I want to use his rig today to teach you about sort of the do's and don'ts of building your very first pro-level bass pedal board, and then kind of look at sort of a Venn diagram of what sort of things are similar about a bass rig and a guitar rig, and what things are different. So what things are the same? The holy trinity of tone, as I call it, always remains the same. What is the holy trinity of tone? Well, it's three things. First thing, high quality, isolated switch mode power supply. On Robert's rig here, we have a Strymon Zuma, which is a great example of a high quality isolated switch mode power supply. And if you're curious what some other ones are that we recommend, we have those linked for you in the description. Second part of the holy trinity of tone is using high quality soldered guitar cables. So we're using our Mogami 2314. It's actually available in pre-made lengths on our Reverb store, so you can check that out if you're interested in how we're doing this. We also have a DIY solder tutorial if you want to buy these materials yourself and try to build them just how we do it using the exact same materials. You can save yourself a bit of dough, but again, we offer pre-made versions if you're not interested in trying your hand with a soldering iron. And the third part of the holy trinity of tone is using high quality buffers. Now on Robert's rig, we actually aren't using any of our own buffers. There are some buffers that are on this rig that are already very high quality that meet the needs of a bass pedal board, and we're gonna get into that a little later in this video. But let's get into this build. I'm excited to start. Let's do it. On Robert's rig, just like I would do for any pedal board, bass or guitar, I like to lay everything out strategically. I like to put the plugs in the jacks and all the pedals, make sure that everything has its full complement of whatever's going to be plugged into it in it. So when I'm doing a layout and I'm setting things out on the pedal board, I know exactly how much space it's going to take up. And that's one of the downsides of using some of these pedal board planning devices, these applications, is they can't always tell you how much depth a plug is going to take up or how much a routing channel is going to require in terms of distance between two rows of pedals. This is why I like to plug in everything, make sure that I have enough room for clearance, and then I start tracing out around the pedals with some pencil so I know where everything goes. Then I'm applying my dual lock Velcro, and again, that's all linked in the description if you want to check some of that stuff out. And then I press it down in place, and I know that I have plenty of room for all of my routing and for everything that I'm going to need to do with my cable management. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get right into the power cabling. So this is routing all of the power from the devices themselves, and I always like to start at the pedal level and then route everything to the source into the power supply. That helps make sure that I'm keeping a consistent flow where all the cables are going in the same direction that are coming out of the pedals and all leading into the source at the power supply. That helps it keep it nice and neat, keeps everything nice and trim, and that I don't have any extra mess underneath the pedal board. And again, I'm using Kobicon 2.1mm connectors for all this. You can find that in the links in the description. And I'm basically just taking the pre-existing cables that came with the Strymon power supply. I'm leaving one side as it originally was on the pedals, and then I'm cutting the other side to length that's terminating at the power supply. So that's the easiest way to do it. I also have a cool DIY DC power cable tutorial that you can check out in the description, and I'll also link it above for you. Next thing, again, in keeping with the holy trinity of tone, we have high quality soldered cables. I'm using Mogami 2314 and SP400 square plugs pretty much throughout this entire thing. We do have another version of square plugs for some of the TRS cables, but it's really the same approach. All I'm doing, stripping these things out, using some high quality 6040 Kester solder, and making sure that we have a great quality connection. And as I said with the holy trinity of tone, soldering this just makes sure that it is a gas tight connection and these cables are going to last you a lifetime and are not at all going to become intermittent, whether it's a different environment, high humidity. It doesn't have any of those concerns that the solderless plugs do and the solderless connections do. This is definitely the way you want to go if you want a bass pedal board that's going to withstand the test of time. So we touched a little bit earlier when talking about the holy trinity of tone about buffers, but when we're looking at Robert's rig, I actually don't have any of my own buffers on there at all. In fact, all of the little interface boxes that I have are either for a USB connection for his C4, which is like a synthesizer type effect that's made by Source Audio. And the only other thing I've done is I've bridged the two IEC power cables for the Zuma and for the Noble, which is the bass amplifier, and merged those into one box with just a single power con connector and a single XLR connector, which is the output to the whole entire system. I've actually not even used one of our input buffers because on the Peterson tuner, it actually has a very high quality input buffer. Now, ordinarily for a guitar player, I would recommend that you get a 1 meg input impedance for your buffer. So whenever we build our DIY buffers, which I've shown in the description, and I'll link above if you want to learn how to make your own, I always recommend guitar players get 1 meg because that's where most of the guitar amps are. But for bass, it is all over the place. There are some up as high as 10 megs and some as low as 500K. And because there's such a variability, I tend not to want to lock down on one, although if I were going to kind of say what a most common one is that I see on most bass amps is somewhere between maybe 2 and 5 megs. This particular buffer in the Peterson Stropo Stomp is a 2.2, so it's a little bit more unloaded than a normal guitar buffer input impedance would be, but it really does sound great. And when we tested it, I actually thought that it performed very well and wasn't that different than if I went up a little higher to say up to 5 megs. And when you get much higher than 10 megs, there really almost is no appreciable difference that you can really detect or hear. So I would say something like this is great. Another one that I really like for bass is the Lely buffer, which has a variable input impedance, so you can select it between a higher input impedance, I think around 2 or 5 megs, or a lower input impedance that's more appropriate for a guitar, which is right at 1 meg. So that is some food for thought in terms of buffer differences between guitar and bass. Now on this rig, we don't have an output buffer because the Noble is balanced on its output. It has an XLR out, it's already converted to low impedance, so there's no benefit here in using an output buffer because the Noble is already done that for you. It's got a really high quality, low output impedance, and that's gonna drive a balanced line back to your mixing board, back to your DAW, however it is that you're using it, so there isn't gonna be any advantage for using an output buffer. Now, if you were using a standard bass amp that was behind you on the stage, that would be a case where you might want to consider using an output buffer at the very end. But if you're using a balanced system like this, where the pedal board is integrated with the amplifier, there's no need for you to do that. You would use the balanced out of there, and you wouldn't have any need to use a separate output buffer. Now, one thing I will add is if you were going to make your own buffer, a DIY style buffer, you didn't have a Peterson tuner, or you didn't have a Lely Sunday driver buffer, you could always use our DIY buffers, which we've linked, and I have plenty of tutorials showing you exactly how to make them, and you can actually adjust the input impedance to whatever you want. If you want a 5 meg input impedance, you just put a 5 meg resistor in R1. You want a 10 meg, you put a 10 meg resistor in R1. Whatever you terminate in the resistor spot 1 on the PC board, and again, this is in our tutorial, that's gonna set the input impedance. So you have a lot of flexibility there, or you could even put it on a switch and have a variable input impedance if you were handy and wanted to go that route. But let's put this to the test. We're gonna take it over the studio. I'm gonna have a bass player come in, demo this thing for you, show you what it can do, show you how quiet and low noise this thing is, and really show off how great of a bass amplifier for a pedalboard integrated bass amp that Noble amplifier is. Let's head over to 25th Street and let's see what this thing can do. I'm here now at 25th Street. I have the rig complete for Robert, and today I'm just gonna be taking you through some of just the basic tones. We're not gonna get into all of Robert's different presets and how he uses them because, frankly, Robert, being an employee at Sweetwater, he's gonna be doing a What's on Your Pedal Board with Don Carr here any day now, so you can get to see how he's gonna actually use the rig in his context. But today I just wanna really show you about the transparency, how there isn't any loss on the system, and by utilizing the holy trinity of tone, high quality buffers, low noise, switch mode, isolated power supplies, and high quality soldered ends is giving us a great recipe for success, keeping the noise low, maintaining the purity of the tone. We're literally just gonna be running through everything in bypass, going out of the Noble amp, and directly into the console, and you're going to get to hear just some kind of classic bass lines and some classic bass tones that are completely unencumbered. We're then just going to go direct so you can kind of hear the difference between the two and how close they actually are. And again, emphasizing the transparency, even though we're running through a number of pedals, some of them running in the effects loop of the Noble, others of them running in front of the Noble, we're able to still get that great pure tone, and if everything's in bypass, there really is no consequence to running through all these different pedals. But before we invite in Tim, I want to just go through what we have here in terms of the basics of the signal path. So the bass comes into the tuner. Again, that's loaded with a 2.2 meg input impedance, then goes into the C4 synth pedal from Source Audio, then to the boost from Dark Glass Audio, then the BMC, which is a mid-range booster, then to the Eventide H9, which then feeds the input of the Noble. From the Noble amp in the effects loop, we then have the HX Stomp, which has its own effects loop, which incorporates the Optivalve from Guru's pedals, which is a compressor, a tube-based compressor that's in the loop of the HX Stomp so that you can move that in either side of the effects that you want and rearrange the order and all those different things. The other cool thing is that the HX Effects is actually a hub for MIDI, which is not only controlling the C4, which is connected to the Nero hub, but which is also controlling the H9. So this can be used as a glorified way in order to change presets, do that globally, and I've also made a custom page up and page down foot switch that's wired through the expression port in the HX Stomp, so this can also act as additional foot switches or can change parameters. So it's pretty cool that we're able to not only keep this board super compact, but have this HX Stomp as the hub that's controlling all of our MIDI-based devices on the actual bass pedal board rig. But enough of me talking. Let's get into Tim playing this bass rig. Let's hear how this thing sounds. So that was our rig for Robert Williams over at Sweetwater, a good friend, and certainly glad to get him a wonderful bass rig like this and really show you some of the different tips and tricks on how to optimize for a bass rig. Remember in the beginning, we kind of talked about that Venn diagram of where guitar players are different from bass players in places where we match up the same. Almost all of the basic principles are almost identical. The holy trinity of tone is maintained whether it's a guitar or whether it's a bass, but the real differences are we have a balanced out on the Noble. A lot of the different bass amps that are on board have a balanced out. That means you don't have any need for an output buffer. Equally, if you have a high quality input buffer with a little bit more unloaded input impedance compared to a guitar, in this case we have the Peterson Strobo Stomp, which has a 2.2 meg input impedance, a little higher than the 1 meg normally of a guitar. That does a better job for bass. So again, really all in all the same principles, same approach, a few little differences, but I think if you're a bass player, you're definitely going to be able to take this back, implement this into your rig, and hopefully you'll be able to get a rig that's sounding great, that's looking great, and of course if you have any questions, you can always put that in the comments, and we are happy to help you out. Now, if you like what you saw today and you like how we enriched your lives as bass players, we do invite you to leave us a comment, tell us what you like best, subscribe and hit the bell icon. You can also go to our Reverb store or our rigdoctor.com store where we sell all of the pre-made patch cables that we used today in all custom lengths, all the way from 4 inches up to 3 feet. And you could go to our website, vertexeffects.com, and you are welcome to buy any of our products. That is a good way to help support this channel, keep it going so that we can continue to pump out great content, just like you saw here today. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, aka The Rig Doctor. See you later.